Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Innovative Revenue Leader podcast. Today, we shift gears and move from how CROs can build and create growth through AI to a topic that I've spent a lot of time on and my guests spent a lot of time on, which is how to handle usage-based sales in enterprise organizations. There's a huge shift happening in this area and it's largely driven by AI, data, how all that stuff is charged. So we're going to spend some time talking about that, and couldn't have a better guest on. I have Anthony McPartlin. He spent 19 years at Lionsbridge. He was leading which is a leading translation and localization services company. While he was there, he led sales operations and enablement before moving over to Serious Decisions, where he used the experience that he gained over those 19 years to help revenue and sales operations leaders elevate the function beyond just the operational norms into something that is truly strategic and helping their companies win. So he's continued doing this at Forrester, where him and I work together, and has helped hundreds of companies in this space. Anthony, welcome.
Thanks, Seth. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. I mean, this is a personal one. I think you and I were talking before, and I wonder if I can keep a straight face as we're going through this, because we've worked together for a long time around a lot of different topics, had a lot of really valuable debates. I truly consider you a thought partner, somebody that if I have a difficult problem I need to work through, you're the guy I call. So, and this is one of those difficult problems. So should we jump in?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do it.
So first question, why should a CRO care about usage-based sales? Like, what's the big deal? Why is it important? What should they do about it? Why do they care about it?
Yeah. And I think, look, let's just say up front that usage-based pricing, usage-based revenue models are not a new thing, right? In traditional B2B, they've been there for a long time. But I think in SaaS, we've seen a kind of a shift away from a kind of a purely seat-based or contract-based approach to this usage-based, or at least usage plus some sort of commit hybrid model, right? And I think some of that is clearly driven by our preferences, and we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. And some of it's about kind of investor preferences around usage-based models, but you look at companies like Snowflake, you look at Datadog, AWS, right? They've all moved to usage-based pricing, and they've shown that when you do that, it can accelerate growth, you can improve NRR, you can create maybe more durable customer relationships. The question is how, right? What's the hypothesis for usage-based pricing? And the first part of it, I think, really is around better alignment with how customers perceive value. Right. So in traditional models, customers pay for seats or licenses regardless of usage. But with UBP, usage-based pricing, you're paying in proportion to the value that you've realized, or maybe more accurately, the value you've perceived to have realized, because it's not always a easy one to clearly measure. And so the idea is that builds more trust and it lowers the friction in buying decisions. So the kind of second benefit there is that it should, in theory, make it easier to land customers, because you're giving them a lower barrier to entry, right? So they start small and they scale as they grow. And I think in markets where it's very competitive, and maybe where speed to land matters more than maximizing ACV, then that can be really important. So the other part of it is the higher net revenue retention. Right. So when the pricing model grows with usage, expansion becomes embedded in the customer lifecycle. And so some of the companies that we already talked about here, Snowflake, Datadog, those types of companies, they have very high NRR, right? 130 to 140% type of thing. And so that's clearly very attractive for a lot of organizations. It's also a very it's a more accurate signal, I think, of fit to product market fit, right? Because it's tied to real adoption. It's not tied to your skill at negotiating big contracts. And so if usage goes up, then the product's delivering value, and if it's not, well, it's kind of a fairly clear sign about your product, or about the level of service that you deliver, or your go-to-market message. those types of things. So it gives you a pretty strong feedback loop, right, in terms of what's working and what isn't. I think as well, a big part of it is that it drives a level of stickiness, because the usage is based on real views of value, and so it becomes a lot more embedded, or at least that's the theory behind it, right? And that hopefully then leads to a lower level of churn, etc., right? And then we talked already about the fact that from an investor perspective, they look at the fact that the NRR is higher, and that the upside is kind of uncapped. So that they're the kind of primary benefits, I think, when people think about why UBP.
Got it. Now when you look at it from a sales leader perspective, it could be kind of scary, right? Because I used to sell a contract, I get $1 million. Now I sell a contract that I think I'm going to get $1 million in a year and a half, and my comp plan's blown up, my planning process is blown up, all that stuff is blown up. Like, conceptually at the company level, I can grow. You basically have unlimited growth because you unlock I only have one sales cycle. That's a year or 2 years from now, but there's benefits to that. That becomes kind of scary to a CRO. And then also you have a new role coming in with the CSM that's going to play possibly a bigger role in upsell than the salesperson. Kind of can be scary for a sales team. Like when you think about that, like those are the negatives, right? And everyone immediately goes to, you're moving my cheese, and this is the change. What are some of the positives that a sales leader should? I mean, you talked a little bit from a CRO standpoint. I think the macroeconomic side of it, and like how this can scale and does scale, those things make sense. But if I'm a CRO, what are in your mind, like, what are some of the things that they should be excited about in doing this?
Yeah. So look, I think there's, you talked about risks and kind of benefits, right? So there are trade-offs here that people, I think, have to understand as part of this process, right? So yeah, we talked just already about some of the kind of the upsides around, why people move to usage-based model. And that certainly, from the perspective of a CRO, is exciting. But I think you have to be aware that it's a shift in approach, right? It's not just a change in pricing model, but it's a shift in essentially your revenue operating model, right? So you're to your point, right? The point of revenue capture moves downstream. So you're shifting the focus from those big upfront deals to sustained usage, and that's that creates opportunity, but it creates some level of risk as well, because you're seeing less upfront revenue, right? Smaller initial deal sizes, and so that means you're delaying the realization of revenue, and so top line growth can look slower earlier on, and so some of that is about managing expectations from the perspective of the CRO, right? Because the board and the investors may misinterpret that as kind of smaller bookings or underperformance. So you need to make sure that the organization and the key stakeholders in the organization really understand how usage-based models evolve, right? And it starts small and it builds and scales. And so you have to have a long-term mindset towards it. It's not going to deliver in the really short term.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, doesn't it pulls the sales role into a more strategic focus for growth rather than the quarterly slog of, I need to hit my number, I need to go get the contract sales. You see it kind of shifting the focus to being more strategic rather than very tactically trying to sell one.
Yeah, exactly. The focus is not on getting a deal over the line. The focus is on, how do I help a client get value, realize value from our products and services over the longer term, because that's how we grow the usage-based revenue, right? And so it is all about product adoption. It's all about usage behavior. It's not about sales execution. And that, is that there's the implications of that, is that, to a certain extent, CROs have less direct control, right? Because you need to all of a sudden, it's not just about the individual sales team, it's about the entire go-to-market organization. It's about marketing, it's about customer success, right? You talked about customer success role being a key part of it, but it's also about product as well, right? Because if the customer has a poor onboarding experience, poor service, or a weak product user experience, then that means the revenue ramp isn't going to be what you maybe hoped it was, right?
Yeah.
So there's it's a significant kind of shift for CROs beyond the sales organization into something that is much more holistic across the whole go-to-market.
Got it. Yeah. Now let's talk about just some of the cadences that a typical CRO goes for that will be challenged by this. So, like, what are some of the things that you see happening around forecasting, comp? Like, what are those challenges that a CRO needs to? They look at this and they go, okay, I get it. It's a chance to be more strategic. It's a chance to ramp revenue quickly. I have a million sales cycles rather than one every 3 years. What are some of the challenges they need to think through as they're going through this process?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas here, right? I mean, I think an obvious one would be to look at things like quota and compensation design, right? Because that becomes more complex, right? In contract-based selling, reps, you're paying them on booked ARR or some version of that at signing.
Sure.
But but with usage models, that value unfolds over time, right? So do you pay the rep on initial commit, or do you pay them on actual usage? How do you avoid reps being penalized, right, for slow ramp or overpaid on spikes that they didn't actually drive?
Yeah.
How do you reward that expansion? So from a CRO perspective, designing fair, motivating comp plans can be more tricky, right? And it's there's a risk there of demoting reps if they feel that maybe usage growth is kind of out of their control.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. Another part of it that I think is a huge part, and you and I have spent quite a bit of time on this with clients, is forecasting, right?
Yeah.
So forecasting gets a lot more dynamic, a lot more data driven, and it's all based around consumption patterns, not locked in contracts, right? So that makes forecasting harder, and for a couple of different reasons, right? You have this, because you're relying on future usage patterns. That's highly variable, and it's very hard to predict. And we've been working with clients in terms of helping them figure out, how do we model that, how do we forecast against that, how do we get all the data together to be able to do that, right? Especially in organizations who maybe haven't got the kind of maturity around things like telemetry, right?
Yeah.
Usage, billing, and the integration of all of that into their their CRM systems and other systems like that, or into their data lakes to be able to analyze it. So there's a kind of a level of data management and analytics complexity there that I think for a lot of organizations means they have to relook at things like their revenue operations model. Like, do they have centralized teams who can help them figure out this stuff, who can help them solve for some of these types of challenges? And I think that's kind of probably a foundational element of kind of readiness for usage-based pricing, right? Do you have a level of maturity around the telemetry, and do you have maturity around the reporting and analytics to support the modeling and the forecasting that's required?
Yeah, and that's critical, right? And I mean, to a certain extent, it means I need to rely less on the seller for what's going to be delivered and more on the analytics, the telemetry, because it's going to be a data-backed decision.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's for a lot of organizations, that's a significant effort involved, and so they have to think about who's actually going to make that happen within their organization. But it is a shift, and you've written about this when you were at Forrester, right? It's a shift in terms of responsibilities when it comes to who owns what, when it comes to modeling and forecasting, the usage patterns in organizations. In a lot of organizations, that is a process that is too often controlled by the sales organization without really any kind of level of data.
yeah, for better or for worse, right? I'm accountable, but I'm accountable, and not having the levers isn't good. I have one more question around this one, which is there a CSM and an AM in the future, or does that role sandwich together and just become that role that handles the strategic growth of a company by leveraging and building the relationship?
Yeah, look, there's definitely going to be, I think, the CS role is transitioning from one that was very much focused on keeping the customer happy to one that now has a much larger role in terms of revenue. I still think that, particularly over the next couple of years, we're going to see a spectrum there in terms of the relationship or the demarcation between account management and CSMs. And certainly in some organizations, especially ones, some of that depends on the size of the organization, right? Because
Yeah.
for some organizations, they don't have the capacity to be able to have, different roles that support that entire process. So there's going to be scenarios where CSMs are covering areas that traditionally you would expect AMs to cover. But there are going to be parts of your customer segmentation, your triangle where, you're going to have clear distinction, I think, particularly in terms of your most important accounts. So I think that, we'll see a mix, but ultimately you're seeing the CSM role evolving to take on more responsibility in that regard.
Yeah, more critical than ever for those two organizations within a company to talk to each other to make sure that they do that the right way.
Yeah, so I think that raises questions as to how we organize, right, between those types of functions. That I think, for CROs, they're going to have to look at the pros and cons of different types of operating models.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Anthony, thank you for joining. Great to have you. Hope to have you back soon.